Okay, in the congruence unit, one of the first things we talked about was definition of congruence in terms of rigid motion. So if you look at figure 1, and you want to see what happened to get to figure 2, are they congruent? I would say yes, they are congruent. What are the rigid motions? Well, I know that this figure 1 is being reflected over the y-axis, and it's also had to be transferred up 1. So that's a translation. So describe them. So we're going to be over the x or y-axis and up 1 unit. You work this one. Make sure you say, are they congruent? What are the rigid motions? And describe the rigid motions. Number 2, given that triangle ALX is congruent to triangle GIW, find the following. I want to find the measure of angle L. Notice if this triangle is rotated, which it has to get to the second triangle, that would tell you where angle L is. Also, if you look at angle L is in the center, and it's congruent to angle I. So angle L is congruent to angle I. The next one, we want to find out what is congruent or what's equal to WI. Well, again, WI is here. And if this first triangle is rotated, it's going to be mapped onto LX. So WI is going to be congruent to LX. Also, the last two letters are LX, and the last two letters are WI. You do this one. Find the measure of angle H, and find the length of TJ. Number 3, which of the following is not a way to prove that two triangles are congruent? Look over the window and see if you can see the congruence flip book, and find the one that's not on the congruence flip book. Number 4, to find the distance RT across the lake, you locate the points as shown in the figure. Explain how to use this information to find RT. Well, here's RT. If you look and see, if you want RT to map onto this triangle here, to map onto the second triangle there, you can tell it's going to be rotated 180 degrees. So, what will RT map onto? It'll map onto IJ, which is 90 feet. And how did you explain it? Well, it was a rotation of 180 degrees. And rotations are rigid motions. You do this one. To find the distance BR across the lake, what is the distance across the lake? State the congruence criterion with figures and write the congruence statement. So, to me, it helps if you label each congruence mark in the picture. I know that this has got one mark right here, so that's a side mark, and it's congruent to this side in this triangle. Next, I see these marks. Again, that's a side mark, and it's congruent to the side in that triangle. And finally, I have 3, which again is labeling a side, congruent to this side. So that would be side, side, side. Now you also need to label the triangles. So if I look at the mark that's between the 1 and the 3 marks, that's angle G. So I would say triangle G. And I got to find the one between the 1 and the 3 marks here. That would be angle M. And if I travel down the 1 mark, that would be N. If I travel down the 1 mark, that would be D. And that leaves T and P. So triangle GNT is congruent to triangle MDP. And it's very important that you label the letters in the correct order. You try this one, label the marks and determine why the triangles are congruent. Again, Label the marks. Make sure you identify the side in the middle. Again, state the congruence criterion. And this time you want to make sure you label your vertical angles in the middle. And finally, again, identify the congruence criterion, label the marks, and you might need to label the side in the middle. Okay, number 7, find the value of x and identify the theorem used. I noticed that x is outside the triangle, so that would be the exterior angle theorem. Alright, in the exterior angle theorem, it tells you that the exterior angle is equal to the sum of the remote interior angles. So that means we're going to take that interior angle and that interior angle and add them. So x is going to equal 50 plus 70. So I know that x equals 120 degrees. So the exterior angle theorem tells you to add the two remote interior angles. So you do this one, identify the theorem, and find the value of y. Number 8, find the measure of angle J and identify the angle or the theorem used. Well, I notice in this triangle that it has a mark on this side and a mark on this side. That tells me that my triangle has two congruent sides. And an isosceles triangle is a triangle that has two congruent sides. So I'm going to use the isosceles triangle theorem to find the measure. And the isosceles triangle theorem says that if I have two equal sides, then I also have two equal angles. So I know that this angle J and angle L are going to be equal. So to find the measure, I would say I don't know them, so let's let them be x. So I could say x plus 32 if I add all my angles in the triangle together, and that's going to give me 180. Because all the angles in a triangle add to give me 180. So if I combine my like terms, x plus x is 2x plus 32 equals 180. And if I use the subtraction property of equality and subtract 32 from both sides, it eliminates on the left. So that gives me 2x equals 148. And then finally I use my division property of equality and divide both sides by 2. So 2 eliminates on the left. 148 divided by 2 would be 74. So the measure of angle J is 74. Now you use the isosceles triangle theorem to find the measure of angle J. Number 9, find the length of LM. Identify the theorem used. Okay, again, in this picture I noticed that I have angle K and angle M marked congruent. So if I have two congruent angles, then again, I'm going to use the isosceles triangle theorem, which says if I have two congruent angles and I have two equal sides. So I would say 3x plus 1 is equal to 4x minus 5. And you want to solve by combining your like terms. So I would combine my x's. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to eliminate the 3x on the left by subtracting it. And it eliminates on the left. That leaves me 1 equals 1x minus 5. And then I'll use the addition property of equality to eliminate the 5 on the right. So 6 equals x. Now the question wanted me to find LM, which LM is here, and it equals 4x minus 5. So I need to say 4, substitute in my 6, minus 5. 4 times 6 is 24, subtract 5. So LX, or LM, is going to equal 19. Now use the isosceles triangle theorem to find the length of AB. Okay, number 10. In the parallelogram below, find the measure of angle B and identify the theorem used. Alright, well I can see that I'm looking for angle B. I can see that it is an obtuse angle. It's in a parallelogram. So I'm going to use, I don't know anything about the opposite side, so I wouldn't use opposite angles. Consecutive means beside or supplementary. And supplementary means that they add to equal 180. So I know that angle B and angle A are consecutive because they're not opposite. So to find them, I would say 64 plus x, or angle B, equals 180. And to solve for x, I'm going to use the subtraction property of equality. So I'll eliminate the 64 on the left. So that gives me x equals 116. You work this one. Find the measure of angle G. Number 11. In the parallelogram below, find the value of A and B. Identify the theorem used. Well, I notice that A and B are sides. I know I'm not looking in triangles, so it's not any of these. So it says opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. So if I want to find the measure of angle A, I'll look at the opposite side, so A would give me 9. And if I want to find the measure of B, I look at the opposite side of the parallelogram, and B would give you 11. Now you work this one. Find the values of x and y. Find the length of the following and identify the theorem used. I want to find the length of AC. AC measures here. Now notice that is not a side, so that is called a diagonal. Diagonals go through the middle. And the theorem says that the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. That means cut in half. So if I want to find the length of AC, I know the distance from A to E is 6. So the distance from E to C would also be 6. So if I add 6 plus 6, AC is 12. Now, I also need to find the value of ED. From E to D, it's from the center there. I know that it's going to be equal to the distance from B to E because our theorem tells us that the diagonals are bisected. So E to D equals 4. Find the length of the following. You need to find BD, and you need to find EC. Number 13. Determine the center of dilation. Now remember, this is something we worked on with similarity. This is a review. So to find the center of dilation, you match up your corresponding points, and you draw lines, and you need to see where those lines intersect. So our lines intersect here. So the center of dilation would be your x-coordinate is 3, and your y-coordinate is 2. You do this one. Determine the scale factor. So to determine the scale factor, you want to see how much larger or smaller the image is. So the pre-image is this one because it has no marks, and this is my image. So if I count a side, I know I have 1.5 from A prime to B prime, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I would say 4 divided by 1.5 equals, you get my answer. So it's 2.3. You do this one. Number 15. Jed is trying to determine the height of his basketball goal. He knows that he's 6.3 feet tall and his shadow is 10.5 feet. He measures the shadow of the goal and finds his shadow is 16 feet. Determine if the goals are correct. So what I do is I use two triangles because we can use similarity. I'd use a smaller one for Jet. He's 6.3 feet tall. That's the vertical height. And his shadow is 10.5. Shadows are on the ground. The shadow of the goal is 16 feet. How tall is the goal? So you need to set up your proportions because they're similar objects. The values in the first triangle are x and 16. The values in the second triangle are 6.3 and 10.5. So to solve any proportion, you cross multiply. 10.5x equals 16 times 6.3. That's going to give me 100.8. And then to solve for x, I needed to use the division property of equality. It eliminates on the left. So I divide 100.8 by 10.5. And that tells me the basketball goal is 9.6 feet. So if Jet's basketball goal is 9.6 feet, how does that compare to the 10-foot goal at the gym? It is shorter. And you do this one. Make sure you draw your triangles and you set up your proportions, and be sure to answer the question.